I'll never forget the sound. The high-pitched, soul-piercing flatline alarm echoing through the sterile hospital room, followed by my wife's gasp as she clutched her swollen belly. In that split second, every heartbeat in my chest stopped with hers. My pregnant wife's monitor, her lifeline, and our unborn child's safety net had gone dark. And the worst part? It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't some random accident. It was deliberate. A hand had reached down, fingers curling around the plug, yanking it from the wall with calculated spite. That hand belonged to someone who had already made our lives a nightmare for months. Karen. Not just any Karen, but the one who ruled our neighborhood's HOA like it was her personal kingdom. A woman who thrived on control, who turned whispers into weapons, and who had made it her mission to break us ever since we moved into the house with the white porch and cherry blossom tree out front. But that night at the hospital was different. That night crossed a line no one could come back from. You see, I had proof. Cold, undeniable, high-definition proof. And later, when I pressed play in front of 12 strangers in a jury box, the silence in the courtroom was louder than the flatline alarm. But before I get to that moment, before the world saw what she did, we have to go back. Back to when everything looked picture perfect and I still believed the house we bought was going to be our dream home. When my wife Emma and I first moved into Maplewood Estates, we were newly married, full of excitement, and expecting our first child. The streets were lined with oak trees, neighbors waved from their porches, and the lawns were cut so precisely it looked like a magazine cover. Everything about it screamed safe, family-friendly, perfect place to raise kids. I remember unloading the moving truck while Emma leaned against the car, one hand on her small but growing belly. Her long brown hair caught the sunlight, and she had that glow. People talk about it like it's a myth, but it's real. She looked at me, smiling, and said, "This is it. This is where we start our forever." Back then, even Karen seemed harmless. She was the first to introduce herself, striding over in her pressed khakis and HOA polo shirt, clipboard tucked under her arm like she was running for office. Her smile was thin but sharp, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Welcome to Maplewood," she announced, handing us a packet thicker than a college textbook. "Here, everything you need to know: bylaws, parking rules, lawn care guidelines, trash pickup schedules, paint color restrictions, noise ordinances." Emma laughed lighthearted. "Wow, that's thorough." Karen's eyes flicked to her belly, then back at me. "We like things orderly here," she said. "Order keeps us safe." At the time, I brushed it off. Every neighborhood had rules, right? Every community had its quirks. But cracks began to show almost immediately. The first was the mailbox. Ours was standard black metal, standing straight and neat at the curb. But 1 week after moving in, we received our first notice of violation taped to the door. According to the HOA, our mailbox was 1 inch too tall. I thought it was a joke. Who measures mailboxes? But Karen's signature was scrawled at the bottom like an executioner's flourish. When I mentioned it at the next community meeting, the room went silent. People looked at their laps. Nobody laughed, nobody protested. And when I glanced at Karen, she was watching me with that same thin smile. Emma squeezed my hand under the table. "Let it go," she whispered. "It's just a mailbox." So I did. I let it go. I cut the post, lowered the box by exactly 1 inch, and sent Karen a photo for proof. But something inside me shifted that day. Because it wasn't just about the mailbox, it was about control. Things escalated from there. Our grass was too long. Our porch light was too bright. Emma's maternity yoga class in our living room was too noisy. Every week brought a new complaint, a new violation, a new reminder that we were living under Karen's thumb. At night, Emma would curl up against me, her voice trembling. "Why does she hate us so much? We've done nothing to her." I didn't have an answer. I'd rub her back, listening to the soft whoosh of the baby monitor we'd already set up in the nursery. "She doesn't hate us," I'd say, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "She just needs control." But the truth is, I'd started to notice something else too. The way Karen's eyes lingered on Emma during HOA meetings. The way she made snide comments. "Pregnant women shouldn't be lifting boxes." "Are you sure you're eating enough greens?" Always disguised as concern. It was like she was waiting for Emma to fail, to slip up, to prove she didn't belong in her perfect kingdom. The breaking point came one sunny afternoon when Emma, 8 months pregnant by then, decided to walk down to the lake with me. We wanted fresh air, a moment of peace, but halfway there, Karen intercepted us. She looked Emma up and down, her lips twitching. You know, technically, pregnant women aren't supposed to be on community property without clearance from the HOA. Liability reasons. Emma froze. What? Karen shrugged, tapping her clipboard. It's in the bylaws. Page 37, Section 4. We can't be held responsible if you fall. The way she said it, if you fall, sent a chill down my spine. I snapped. She's walking, not climbing a ladder, not playing football, walking, on a sidewalk we pay dues for. Karen leaned closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. Rules are rules. Emma pulled me away before I said something that would make things worse, but her hands were trembling. That night, she cried into my chest. I don't feel safe here anymore, she whispered. And that was the first time I thought about leaving, about selling the house, packing up and running far from Maplewood Estates. But Emma was due any week and moving wasn't an option. We were trapped. Or at least that's how it felt. The night it all came crashing down started like any other. Emma had been experiencing cramps, and the doctor suggested we check into the hospital just to be safe. I grabbed our overnight bag, helped her into the car, and tried to hide the fear gnawing at my stomach. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and humming machines. Nurses hooked Emma up to a monitor, soft beeps filling the room like a lullaby. Watching the green line dance across the screen, I felt some of the tension leave my chest. Our baby's heartbeat was steady. Emma squeezed my hand. See, everything's okay. But I didn't know then what was lurking just beyond the door. I didn't know that Karen, who had followed us, who had slipped into the hospital with that same suffocating perfume, was about to cross a line that would change everything. The line between petty harassment and attempted murder. And I didn't know that the security camera in that room was rolling, catching every second in perfect, undeniable detail. Because the moment the monitor flatlined, I thought I was losing my wife and child. But when I saw who pulled the plug, my blood ran cold. People ask me all the time, why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you see the signs? The truth is, I did, but I didn't want to. Nobody wants to admit they've brought a storm into their home, especially when it looks so much like a sunny day. Before that night at the hospital, before the flatline alarm ripped my soul apart, there were warnings. Flashbacks that haunt me now, like puzzle pieces I ignored because I didn't want to see the whole picture. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't just about Karen, it was about my family too. I grew up in a family where appearances were everything. My father was a decorated veteran, the kind of man people saluted even when he wasn't in uniform. My mother kept a spotless home, china dishes locked behind glass, white carpets you couldn't set foot on without socks. And my sister, Clara, she was the golden child. Clara could do no wrong. When she broke curfew, my father called her independent. When I missed curfew, I was irresponsible. When Clara crashed Dad's car into a mailbox, he shrugged and said, "Accidents happen." When I dented my bike, he said I should have known better. Favoritism wasn't just present, it was tradition. So when Emma and I got married, I promised myself I'd break that cycle. I swore our child, boy or girl, would never feel less than, never grow up in the shadow of someone else's perfection. But the moment Karen entered our lives, I felt that old wound reopen. Because Karen, in her own twisted way, reminded me of my sister Clara. The same smug smile, the same cutting remarks disguised as advice. The same confidence that no matter what, she'd come out on top because people would believe her over me. It was like my childhood all over again, and I hated how powerless it made me feel. I remember one HOA barbecue that summer. The whole neighborhood was there, kids running through sprinklers, men clustered around the grill, women laughing under the shade of a tent. On the surface, it was idyllic. Karen, of course, was the center of it all. Clipboard in one hand, spatula in the other, like she was both hostess and warden. Emma and I had brought a homemade peach cobbler, warm from the oven. I carried it carefully, proud of Emma for managing to bake despite her swollen ankles. But when we set it on the dessert table, Karen's voice cut through the chatter. "Oh, how sweet," she said loudly, eyeing the cobbler. "You actually cooked, brave, considering," she trailed off, her gaze flicking to Emma's belly. The laughter that followed was polite, nervous, the kind that hides discomfort. Emma's face flushed crimson. She forced a smile, but I saw the way her hands trembled as she adjusted the serving spoon. Later, I overheard Karen talking to another neighbor. "Pregnant women shouldn't strain themselves. It's irresponsible." If something happened, the HOA could be liable. Liable, she said it like Emma's pregnancy was a ticking time bomb, like our baby was nothing more than a lawsuit waiting to happen. I clenched my fists, but Emma tugged my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "She wants a reaction, don't give her one." So I swallowed it, like I'd swallowed every unfair comparison growing up. But that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered, why did Karen seem obsessed with Emma? Why did she take such pleasure in making her feel small? The answer came weeks later in the form of a secret. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Langley, was an older widow who lived 3 houses down. She liked Emma, brought her fresh-baked bread sometimes, always asked about the baby. One evening, while Emma napped on the couch, I walked outside and found Mrs. Langley watering her roses. She lowered her voice when I approached. "You should be careful with Karen." I frowned, careful. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "She lost a baby years ago, miscarriage. After that, she got bitter, controlling. She can't stand to see other women pregnant. It eats her alive." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, Karen's hostility made a twisted kind of sense. But sympathy is not the same as forgiveness. Pain explains cruelty, it doesn't excuse it. That night I told Emma. She stared at me wide-eyed, then shook her head. "So what? I'm supposed to feel guilty for being pregnant, for our baby being healthy." "No," I said quickly. I think this is why she's targeting you. It's not about us, it's about her." Emma hugged her belly protectively. "That doesn't make me feel any safer." And she was right, because knowing the reason behind the venom didn't stop the sting. Things escalated further when Clara, yes, my golden child's sister, decided to visit. She breezed into our house like she owned it, perfume filling the air, her laughter bouncing off the walls. Emma was resting upstairs, swollen and tired, but Clara insisted on helping, which in her language meant criticizing. "Why do you have the crib there? Doesn't it make more sense by the window? Are you sure you want that paint color? It's a little drab." And then the kicker. "You're letting Karen get under your skin? She's just enforcing rules. Maybe you're too sensitive." I snapped. "You don't live here, Clara. You don't deal with her every day." Clara rolled her eyes. "You've always been dramatic, Dad used to say." "Yeah," I cut her off, bitterness rising. "Dad always said a lot of things." Emma stepped in then, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about siding with Karen. This is about our safety, our baby's safety." Clara shrugged. "If you say so." But later I caught her on the porch talking to Karen, laughing with her, whispering like old friends. The sight made my stomach twist. Looking back, I wonder if Clara fueled Karen's fire. If she shared stories, exaggerated Emma's sensitivity, painted us as weak. Because not long after Clara's visit, the harassment turned darker. One morning, we found our trash can overturned, garbage spilling into the street. A violation notice was already taped to the bin, as if Karen had been waiting. Another time, Emma swore she saw Karen standing outside the nursery window, just watching. By the time I rushed outside, she was gone. I called the HOA office, demanded answers, but they claimed ignorance. "Mrs. Peterson is within her rights to perform inspections," they said. Inspections at night, peering into our windows. Emma grew more anxious with each passing day. The stress wasn't just affecting her, it was affecting the baby. Her doctor warned us her blood pressure was climbing. "She needs peace," he said firmly. "Stress is dangerous in late pregnancy." But how could we have peace when Karen lurked like a shadow? The night before the hospital incident, Emma sat on the couch, rubbing her belly in circles. "Do you think she'll ever stop?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her, pressed my forehead against hers. "Yes, one way or another she'll stop. I'll make sure of it." I meant it as comfort, but there was steel in my voice. Because I'd made a silent promise. If Karen crossed one more line, I wouldn't just roll over. I didn't know then how close we were to that line, how close we were to watching it snap. Because less than 24 hours later, Emma's monitor flatlined, and the security footage revealed the unthinkable. When people talk about the moment everything changes, they usually mean something small, meeting their spouse, getting a job offer, finding out they're expecting. For us, that moment came with the flick of a switch, the yank of a plug. But before that hospital room, there was the storm, the hours leading up to it, the escalation that felt like a fuse burning straight toward dynamite. Emma was restless that day. Her hands kept rubbing her belly, her breaths came short, her patience frayed at every sound. The pregnancy had entered its final weeks and her body was begging for rest. But peace didn't exist in Maplewood Estates. Not with Karen circling. It started that morning when I opened the front door to grab the paper. Taped across the glass was another notice. Violation, unauthorized decorations. I stared at it, confused. Decorations. The only thing on our porch was a small wreath Emma had hung with a pink ribbon, a soft way of celebrating the baby we were about to welcome. I yanked the paper free, crumpled it in my fist, and stormed back inside. Emma looked up from the couch, dark circles under her eyes. What now? I flattened the paper on the coffee table. Apparently, your wreath is against the law. Her hand flew to her mouth. It's just a ribbon. Exactly, I snapped. But Karen doesn't care, she's baiting us. Emma's eyes welled with tears, frustration etched into every line of her face. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living under her microscope. I knelt, taking her trembling hands in mine. Hey, listen to me, you're not alone. She wants to break us apart, but she won't. We're stronger than her. Emma tried to smile, but the exhaustion was winning. I could see it in the slump of her shoulders, in the way she leaned into me like her body was too heavy to hold. And that's when the cramps started. By noon, she was doubled over, gasping through clenched teeth. I called the doctor, who told us to come in immediately. My heart pounded as I threw our bags into the car and helped her into the passenger seat. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Every red light mocked me, every second stretched thin. Emma gripped the seatbelt, knuckles white, whispering, please, not yet, please, not yet. We finally pulled into the hospital parking lot. I rushed around to her side, helping her out of the car. The air smelled of rain, heavy clouds pressed low in the sky, promising a storm. Inside, the hospital was its own world. Bright lights, antiseptic tang, wheels squeaking on tile floors. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, and soon Emma was settled into a bed, monitors beeping steadily as wires traced from her belly to machines. The green blip of our baby's heartbeat appeared on the screen. Strong, steady, alive. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed into the chair beside her. See, Emma whispered, managing a smile. She's fine. I kissed her hand. She's a fighter just like her mom. For a few hours, it felt like we were safe. Nurses checked in, machines hummed, the rain outside tapped against the window like a lullaby. I even closed my eyes for a moment, letting exhaustion pull at me. But then the door creaked open. Karen. She slipped inside as if she belonged there, her hair slick from the rain, that clipboard still clutched like a weapon. The sight of her in that hospital room sent ice through my veins. What are you doing here? I hissed, standing instantly. Her eyes flicked to Emma, pale and sweating in the bed. Then to the monitor, its green line dancing. She smiled, cold, calculated. I was in the area, thought I'd check in. Liability, you know. Emma flinched at the word. This isn't your neighborhood, Karen, I snapped, my voice low but shaking. This is a hospital, you don't belong here. Karen's lips twitched. Hospitals are full of accidents, mistakes. It's important someone holds people accountable. Emma whispered weakly, please just go. For a second I thought she might. But then Karen stepped closer to the monitor, her perfume cutting through the sterile hospital air. She leaned down, eyes narrowing at the glowing numbers. Machines fail, she murmured. Sometimes they give people false hope. My pulse hammered in my ears. I moved between her and the bed, my body trembling with rage. If you don't leave right now, I'll... The door burst open. A nurse stepped in, eyebrows raised. Is everything okay here? Karen straightened instantly, mask back in place. Of course, just visiting a neighbor. She smiled sweetly at the nurse. I'll leave you to it. She slipped out without another word, leaving the air thick with her poison. The nurse glanced at us, suspicious, but Emma waved her off. It's fine, she whispered. But it wasn't fine, not even close. Hours later, after Emma finally drifted into a light sleep, I sat in the corner, my phone clutched tight. I had a choice to make. I could call security. I could demand they keep Karen out, but part of me wondered who would believe me. Who would believe she was a threat? To anyone else, she was just a nosy HOA president. To us, she was a predator in khakis. I stared at the security camera in the corner of the room, its red light blinking softly. At least it was watching. At least it was recording. That thought comforted me more than I realized. But then Emma stirred, wincing, another contraction hitting. I rushed to her side, gripping her hand. "Breathe with me," I whispered. "In, out, that's it." For a few moments the world shrank to just us, our hands, our breaths, the steady beep of the monitor. And then silence. The flatline alarm shattered the quiet, a piercing shriek that tore through my chest. I froze, eyes snapping to the screen. The green line was gone. Emma gasped, her body jerking as panic surged. "No, no, no." I slammed the call button, shouting for help. Nurses rushed in, shouting orders, hands flying over wires and screens. But in the chaos, I saw it. The plug, dangling from the wall, disconnected. My stomach plummeted. My eyes darted to the door, still swinging slightly on its hinges. A flash of khaki, a smear of perfume in the air. Karen. It had been seconds, just seconds. But in that moment, she had crossed the line from nuisance to monster. Doctors swarmed the room. "Heart rate's dropping, get it back up. We need to reattach now." The smell of antiseptic grew sharp, stinging my nose as sweat poured down my face. Emma sobbed, clutching her belly. "The baby, please." I held her hand, my own shaking uncontrollably. They've got her, stay with me, Em." The monitor flickered, then beeped again, a weak but present rhythm returning to the screen. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly fell to my knees. But underneath the relief was rage, boiling, volcanic rage. Because I knew what I had seen, and I knew the camera had seen it too. Later, when Emma was stabilized and resting, a question burned in my mind. Why? Why would anyone, unplug a pregnant woman's monitor? What kind of hatred, what kind of sickness could drive someone to such cruelty? And the darker question, what would she try next? That was the night I realized this wasn't just about harassment. This was about survival. And the only thing standing between us and Karen's madness was the truth caught on that camera. I used to think the scariest sound in the world was silence. That moment when a baby's cry doesn't come, when a heart monitor cuts off, when the person you love most in the world stops breathing. But I was wrong. The scariest sound in the world is the flatline alarm. That piercing shriek doesn't just announce danger, it announces death. It forces you to picture the worst-case scenario in bright red letters across your mind. That's what ripped through the room the night Karen crossed the line. The nurses worked like a machine, snapping wires back into place, reattaching leads, their voices sharp and urgent. "Get the fetal monitor back on. Mother's blood pressure dropping, stabilize now." I held Emma's hand, trying to anchor her, but her skin was clammy, her grip weak. Her eyes searched mine, wild with terror. "Our baby," she gasped. "Please." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "She's still here, Em. Hold on, just hold on." The monitor flickered. For one agonizing moment, the line was flat. And then beep, beep. The rhythm returned, faint but there. The collective exhale from the room hit like a wave. But it wasn't relief. Not really. Because in the back of my mind, I knew something no one else did. That plug hadn't fallen out by accident. After the chaos settled, the doctor, a tired-looking man with graying hair and steady eyes, pulled me aside. "Your wife and baby are stable," he said, his voice low. "But this kind of stress is dangerous. Her blood pressure spiked. She needs calm, not chaos." I nodded, though my chest was still heaving. "I understand." He gave me a long look, as if he could sense the storm brewing beneath my skin. "Do you?" I almost told him then. Almost blurted out everything. The HOA, the harassment, Karen standing in this very room minutes before the monitor went dead. But the words lodged in my throat. Because what if he didn't believe me? What if he thought I was just another paranoid husband cracking under pressure? So I just said, "Yes, doctor." When I returned to Emma's bedside, she was crying quietly, her hand on her stomach. "She tried to kill us," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat beside her, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "I know." "What if the baby had?" Her voice broke. I grabbed her hand, pressed it to my chest. Don't go there, she's okay, you're okay, that's all that matters." But in my head, another voice whispered, "For now." Security came by not long after, responding to the alarm. A guard in a Navy uniform stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Sir, we just need to confirm. Was anyone in the room before the alarm?" I froze. This was my chance. This was the moment I could expose Karen. But Emma's wide eyes stopped me. Fear swam in them, fear not just for herself, but for the baby. And underneath that fear was a plea, don't make this bigger, not yet. So I lied. No, I said, it just came loose. The guard scribbled something on his clipboard, gave a curt nod, and left. Emma let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she whispered. But my chest burned, because I knew the truth, and I knew the camera had it too. The rest of that night blurred. Nurses checked vitals, machines beeped steadily, rain lashed against the windows. Emma drifted in and out of sleep, her body exhausted from the contractions and the scare. I sat in the corner staring at the security camera. Its red light blinked steadily like it was winking at me. A silent reminder I saw, I know, I remember. And the question clawed at me, how long before Karen tried again? The next morning, Emma was moved to a private recovery room. Sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds, catching the pale sheen of her skin. She looked fragile in that bed, tubes still attached, her belly rising and falling with shallow breaths. I stepped out into the hallway to grab a coffee. The hospital smelled of burnt beans and bleach, the kind of scent that seeps into your clothes. I was stirring sugar into the paper cup when I heard it. Her voice, Karen. I turned, and there she was, standing at the nurse's station, chatting casually as if she belonged. Her khakis were crisp, her hair perfectly styled, as though she hadn't just nearly killed my wife and child the night before. I clenched the cup so hard the lid popped off, scalding coffee splattering across my hand. I didn't even feel it. All I felt was rage. I stalked toward her, my voice low and deadly. What the hell are you doing here? Karen blinked innocently. Oh, hello, just checking in. I heard there was an incident. An incident? I hissed. You unplugged her monitor. Her smile didn't falter. That's a serious accusation. My hands shook, my vision tunneled. For a split second, I imagined grabbing her clipboard and snapping it in half. But the nurse behind the desk was watching, eyebrows raised. Karen leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. Machines fail, she whispered. Sometimes people do too. My blood ran cold. And then she walked away, just like that. When I returned to Emma, she saw it on my face. She was here, was she? I nodded, my jaw tight. Emma's lips trembled. She won't stop until... She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. Until one of us was gone. That night, after Emma finally fell into a deep sleep, I slipped out of the room and found the hospital's security office. The man inside looked up from his monitors, annoyed. Can I help you? I need footage, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. From room 214 last night. He frowned. Patients don't get access to surveillance. This isn't about access, I said, leaning forward. It's about evidence. Someone tampered with my wife's monitor. I saw it. The camera saw it too. He hesitated, studying me. Finally, he sighed and turned to his keyboard. I'll pull it up. The screen flickered, showing the grainy black and white feed of our hospital room. I held my breath as the timestamp rolled forward. There. The door opened. Karen slipped inside. I watched, fists clenched, as she moved toward the bed, her hand reaching down, fingers curling around the plug. She yanked it free. The monitor flatlined. Emma jerked, nurses rushed in. And Karen, she slipped out, calm as ever. The guard whistled softly. Well, damn. Save it, I said, my voice like stone. Make me a copy, I'm going to need it. As I walked back to Emma's room, the weight of that footage pressed heavy on my chest. Because now I had proof. Real, undeniable proof. But proof brings choices. Do you protect family by staying quiet, or do you burn everything down by telling the truth? And if I went public with this, would it put Emma in more danger? I didn't know then that the decision would land me in a courtroom, playing that footage for a jury who would decide Karen's fate, and maybe ours too. I didn't sleep that night. Emma dozed in short bursts, but every beep of the machine made me jolt upright, checking the leads, checking her chest, checking the rise and fall of her belly. I was terrified of silence now. Silence meant loss. Silence meant Karen. The copy of the footage weighed heavy in my pocket, saved to a USB drive the security officer had reluctantly handed over. Every few minutes I touched it just to make sure it was still there. Proof, the truth, a weapon. And yet the question gnawed at me. When do I use it? How? At dawn, the doctor came in, rubbing his tired eyes. She stabilized overnight, he said softly, flipping through Emma's chart. But there's some bruising on the placenta. We need to keep her under observation. Bruising, I repeated, my voice sharp. He gave me a measured look. Stress, trauma, sometimes even something as small as a sudden drop in maternal blood pressure can cause it. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but this is a warning sign. No more incidents. She needs peace. His words were calm, clinical, but they sliced through me like blades, because he didn't know what I knew. Peace wasn't possible, not with Karen circling like a vulture. Later that morning, Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked pale, exhausted, but alive. "How's the baby?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently, still strong, still fighting. She let out a shaky breath, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Thank God. I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead. She's a fighter just like her mom. Emma gave a weak smile, but it faded quickly. She won't stop, will she, Karen? I couldn't lie. No, not unless we stop her. Emma's fingers tightened around mine. Then we have to, for our baby. The hospital became a cage. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, scribbling notes. The hallway echoed with the squeak of carts, the shuffle of rubber shoes, the occasional wail of another patient. But behind it all was Karen. Not physically, not always, but her presence was everywhere. Every time the door creaked open, Emma flinched. Every time a nurse adjusted the monitor, I stiffened, watching their hands too closely. Every beep of the machine became both comfort and torment, proof that it was working, but also a reminder of how close we'd come to silence. On the second day, the doctor returned with test results. "Your wife's stable, but we're moving her to the maternity wing under restricted access," he explained. "We've flagged her chart. Only authorized staff can enter." "Good," I said immediately. But Emma frowned, restricted like security. The doctor nodded. "Yes, we don't usually take this step unless there's a risk of interference. But after last night's scare—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his eyes flicked toward me, questioning. For a moment, I considered telling him, pulling the USB out of my pocket, plugging it into his office computer, showing him Karen's crime. But something stopped me. Because once I revealed it, there would be no turning back. No more secrecy. It would be police reports, lawyers, court dates. And if Karen found out I had the footage, would she come after us harder? So I just said, "Thank you, doctor, that's the right call." That night I stepped outside for air. The hospital courtyard was damp from the evening rain, the benches slick, the smell of wet earth heavy in the air. I sat there, head in my hands, trying to think. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I looked up. Karen. She stood there at the edge of the courtyard, arms folded, her face lit faintly by the orange glow of the security lights. "You look tired," she said casually. "Hospitals will do that to you." I rose slowly, every muscle in my body tensed. "What do you want?" She tilted her head, a mocking smile on her lips. "Want? I don't want anything. I already have what I wanted." I clenched my fists. "You almost killed them." Her smile widened, almost but not quite shame. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, my voice low and trembling with fury. "You listen to me. I have proof. I have you on camera. One more step, one more stunt, and I'll burn your perfect little HOA world to the ground." Karen's eyes glittered with something between amusement and menace. She leaned closer, her whisper like poison. "Do it, take me to court. Let's see who they believe, the respected HOA president or the hysterical husband grasping at straws. You think a jury will side with you?" I stared at her, chest heaving, heart pounding. She chuckled, then turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like a gavel striking wood. The sound echoed in my skull long after she disappeared. I didn't tell Emma about that encounter. Not yet. She was fragile enough, clinging to hope, holding on for the baby. I couldn't load her down with more fear. But inside me, a decision was forming. This wouldn't end with silence. This wouldn't end with fear. It would end in a courtroom, under the glare of truth, with that footage on full display. And I would make sure the world saw Karen for what she truly was. The following day, the hospital's legal department called me in. A woman in a gray blazer and thin glasses sat across from me, papers spread out between us. "We've reviewed the security report," she said briskly. "The unplugging incident raised serious liability concerns. If you or your wife intend to pursue charges, the hospital will cooperate fully." I hesitated. My mind replayed Corinne's words in the courtyard. Let's see who they believe. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence?" Slowly, I slid the USB across the table. Her eyes sharpened. She plugged it into her laptop, and together we watched. Corinne slipping in, her hand pulling the cord, the flat line. The lawyer leaned back, her face pale. "This is damning." "Will it hold in court?" I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's clear, intentional, yes, but it also puts you in the center of a storm. Are you ready for that?" I thought of Emma lying in that hospital bed. I thought of our unborn daughter fighting for her first breath. I thought of Corinne's smirk, her whisper in the dark. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm ready." That night when I returned to Emma, I finally told her. About the footage, about the lawyer, about Corinne in the courtyard. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. "So it's real. It's really going to court." I nodded. "It has to. We can't let her win, not this time." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there too, something fiercer. "Strength. Then we fight," she whispered, "for our baby." And that's when the subpoenas were issued. Corinne thought she had control, thought she was untouchable. But soon, she'd be standing in front of a jury with nowhere to run. Because I was going to play the footage for them, live. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and cold coffee. That mix of stale air conditioning and fear. My shoes clicked on the marble floor as I walked down the corridor, my hand tight around the strap of the leather case holding the USB drive. Inside that tiny piece of plastic was the beating heart of our case, the truth. And also the thing I feared most, exposure, because once it played, there would be no taking it back. Emma couldn't be there. The doctor had forbidden it. Her stress levels were still too high, and she needed constant monitoring. So she stayed in the hospital bed, holding our unborn child close while I walked into battle alone. But I wasn't really alone. My sister Laura had flown in from 2 states away to sit behind me in the gallery. My father sat beside her, his weathered hands gripping the bench like he was holding on for dear life. And when I turned briefly before the session began, their eyes met mine, steady, proud, unshaken. I drew strength from that. Then Corinne walked in. She wore a crisp navy suit, pearls at her throat, her hair pinned in that severe bun she always wore during HOA meetings. She didn't look worried. She looked smug, like she was about to attend a business luncheon, not a trial where her actions could land her behind bars. Her attorney, a slick man with too much cologne, leaned close and whispered something in her ear. She smirked and scanned the room until her eyes landed on me. She mouthed 2 words. "You'll lose." The judge called the case, and the formalities began. The prosecutor laid out the charges: reckless endangerment, interference with hospital equipment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The words rang heavy in the air, each one hammering the polished oak like a nail. Corinne's lawyer countered with practiced charm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is nothing more than a misunderstanding, a neighborly dispute spun out of control. My client is a respected community leader. She has no history of violence, no criminal record. She simply checked on a patient." I wanted to leap from my chair and scream. "Checked on her? You tried to kill her." But I stayed seated, jaw tight, knuckles white. Then came the testimonies. First, the hospital security guard explaining the chain of custody for the footage. Then the ER nurse recounting the chaos when the monitor flatlined. She described the way Emma's vitals plummeted, the alarms shrieking, the scramble to reconnect the leads. Her voice cracked as she said, "If we hadn't caught it in time, we could have lost both mother and child." The courtroom went silent. When it was my turn, my heart thundered in my chest as I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat down, hands trembling. The prosecutor asked simple questions at first: my name, my relation to Emma, the events of that night. I described every detail: the sterile hospital smell, the hum of the machines, the sound of the alarm when the monitor went dead. And then, the moment I saw Corinne. She didn't look scared, I told the jury, my voice hoarse. She looked satisfied, like it was a game, like my wife's life was just another rule she got to enforce. I glanced at Karen as I said it. She stared back, unblinking, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Then came the prosecutor's final question. Do you have evidence to support your claim? I swallowed hard. This was it. Yes, I said, I do. The bailiff carried my USB drive to the clerk, who plugged it into the courtroom's screen system. The lights dimmed slightly. The jury shifted forward in their seats. And then the footage began. The grainy black and white video flickered to life. There was Emma, asleep in her hospital bed, her belly rising and falling with each shallow breath. The steady green glow of the monitor lights pulsed. Then Karen appeared in the corner of the frame. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath in the courtroom as she moved with purpose, her hand reaching for the cord. The moment she pulled it, flatline, the soundless video carried a weight heavier than any scream. Then the door swung open, the nurse rushing in. Karen slipped away. The footage ended. The courtroom erupted in whispers, gasps, muffled outrage. The prosecutor let the silence linger before turning to the jury. This is not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. She endangered 2 lives because of spite. Karen's lawyer scrambled, objecting, spinning some desperate story about how she thought the machine wasn't working properly and was only trying to reset it. But the jury's faces told another story. Their jaws clenched, eyes narrowed, disgust written in every wrinkle. Then came cross-examination. Karen's lawyer tried to twist my words, tried to paint me as paranoid, overprotective, even unstable. Isn't it true, he asked, that you and my client have a long history of disputes in your neighborhood? Yes, I said evenly, because she bullies everyone. Isn't it possible that your stress and exhaustion made you misinterpret her actions? I leaned forward, staring him dead in the eye. Stress doesn't fabricate video evidence. A ripple of quiet laughter ran through the gallery. Even the judge's mouth twitched before he called for order. Finally, Karen herself took the stand. She spoke with that same smug confidence, spinning lies like silk. I only wanted to help. The room looked unattended. I thought maybe the wires were tangled. The prosecutor cut her off. So your idea of help is pulling a plug on life-saving equipment. Karen faltered, her voice tightening. I didn't realize. But the jury wasn't buying it. They'd seen the look on her face in that footage, intentional, cold. The trial stretched late into the afternoon. By the time closing arguments ended, the jury's expressions were set, hardened. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if they let her walk? What if Karen really was untouchable? The judge recessed for deliberation. I sat in that wooden bench, palms sweating, stomach churning, waiting for the verdict. When the jury finally filed back in, the silence was suffocating. The foreman stood, a folded paper in his hand. My heart stopped beating for a second. We, the jury, find the defendant. The pause stretched like a noose tightening. Guilty. The word rang like a bell, shattering the air, echoing through my bones. Karen's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no words. The judge banged the gavel. Sentencing would come later, but the verdict was enough. I had played the footage for the jury, and the truth had finally broken through her lies. But as I walked out of that courtroom, relief flooding me, I knew this wasn't over. Because justice in a courtroom doesn't erase scars at home. And Emma still had to carry both the baby and the trauma. The real question was, how do we heal after this? The gavel had fallen, the word guilty still ringing in my ears, but walking out of that courthouse didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Karen was led away in handcuffs, her pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights as if mocking her downfall. The smirk she wore so confidently had evaporated, replaced by something I never thought I'd see on her face: fear. But even with the jury's decision, the weight in my chest didn't lift. Because when I got home, Emma wasn't there to hug me. She was still lying in a hospital bed, hooked to machines. And every beep, every flutter of the monitor was a reminder that justice in court didn't erase what she'd been through. When I walked into her room that evening, Emma's eyes searched mine immediately. Well, she whispered. I took her hand, kissed her knuckles. Guilty on all counts. Her breath hitched, tears welling. she pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. Then maybe our daughter will come into a safer world. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. It was faint, tired, but real. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital corridors and therapy sessions. Emma had to process not just the physical strain, but the betrayal. How someone we saw every week at neighborhood events, someone who waved while watering her lawn, had nearly cost us everything. She started counseling with a trauma therapist, and I joined her for some sessions. The therapist's office was warm, the air faintly scented with lavender, soft light spilling over the bookshelves. Emma sat on the couch, her hands folded over her belly, and for the first time she let the words spill out. I felt powerless, she admitted, her voice cracking. Lying there helpless while she decided whether we lived or died. I put my arm around her, but the therapist shook her head gently. Let her finish, she needs to say it. Emma's eyes glistened as she looked at me. I couldn't protect our baby, I couldn't protect you, and I hated myself for it. I swallowed hard. You did protect us, you held on, you fought, that's why she's still alive. The therapist nodded. Healing means rewriting that story, not as victimhood, but as survival. It was the first time I saw Emma's posture shift, not broken, but stronger. 3 months later, Emma went into labor. The hospital smell hit me again, sterile, sharp, but this time it didn't send me spiraling. This time the monitors beeping weren't terrifying, they were a soundtrack of life. Emma's screams filled the room, raw and human, and when our daughter finally arrived, wailing and pink, I thought my chest might burst. I held her tiny body against my chest, the warmth of her skin against mine, the sound of her cry echoing in my ears. Emma, exhausted and drenched in sweat, smiled through tears. She's here, she whispered. We did it. Not even Corinne's shadow could touch that moment. But scars linger, even when wounds heal. I'd wake sometimes in the night to the phantom sound of a flatline, my body jerking upright, scanning the dark for danger. Emma flinched at sudden noises, her hand instinctively going to her stomach long after our daughter was born. We were free but not untouched. Still, we kept moving forward. We moved out of that neighborhood, away from the manicured lawns and ironclad HOA rules, away from the place where Corinne's shadow still lingered. We bought a little house near the woods, where the only sounds were birdsong and whined through the pines. Emma planted a garden. Our daughter grew under open skis. And slowly we breathed easier. When sentencing day arrived, we didn't go in person. The prosecutor sent us the news by phone. Corinne had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, with no possibility of early release. The prosecutor's voice was matter-of-fact, but mine shook as I thanked him. Emma sat beside me, our daughter cooing in her lap. 5 years, I repeated. Emma nodded slowly. 5 years for her, a lifetime for us. But she didn't say it with bitterness. She said it with resolve. I sometimes think back to that moment in the courtroom, when the footage played, and the entire room saw what I had carried in my chest for weeks. It wasn't just about Corinne. It was about every time someone thinks they're untouchable, every time cruelty hides behind power, every time a bully smiles while they destroy. The truth has a way of cutting through all of it. And in that courtroom, the truth was louder than Corinne's lies. Our daughter is 6 months old now. She laughs easily, sleeps rarely, and every time I hold her, I feel that same fierce protectiveness coursing through me. Sometimes when Emma rocks her in the nursery, I stand at the doorway and just watch. Watch the way Emma hums softly, the way our daughter clutches her finger, the way light filters through the curtains. It feels fragile, but it also feels unbreakable. Because we already survived the worst. So here's what I've learned. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor. Sometimes it waves while collecting mail. Sometimes it hides behind rules and titles. But truth matters, evidence matters, speaking up matters. And family, protecting the people you love, is worth every fight. That's my story, and now I want to ask you. What would you have done if someone you trusted, even a neighbor, endangered your family? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought to bring the truth into the light? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hit you hard, make sure you subscribe, because stories like these remind us how fragile and how strong family really is.